Weber from the Rock Valley Community School in Rock Valley, Iowa, and we are going to go through lesson number 3 for the Nutrients for Life curriculum. So in our Nourishing the Planet curriculum that we have, lesson number 3 is going to talk about plant-soil interaction. So when we start looking at this, we can see that there's going to be different things that are going to be happening in our soil. So we've already spent some time looking a little bit about nutrients and how the different plant accommodations. But what we're really going to be looking at here, you can see that we're going to explain the roles of diffusion and active transport in moving nutrients from the soil to the plant. We're also going to talk about the formation of soil and soil horizons. We're going to talk a little bit about the Dust Bowl, and then we're also going to talk a little bit about soil horizons. So in this activity today, how do plants actually obtain nutrients? We have any ideas? Eli?
From the ground.
Okay, they're going to get nutrients from the ground, right? So then the question becomes, how do the nutrients get into the ground? So here in northwest Iowa, we have a lot of livestock, so we have a lot of manure, but there's going to be different fertilizers that we're going to need that are going to get the nutrients that plants need in order to be able to grow into the soil to hopefully get them to the plants. So one of the first things here, I just want you guys to raise your hand if you agree, and you're going to keep your hand down if you disagree, okay? So the first one, it says plant roots have tiny hairs that absorb water. Raise your hand if you agree, and keep your hand down if you disagree. Okay, put them down. Second one, plant roots use energy to pump water into the plant. Raise your hand if you agree, and keep your hand down if you disagree. Okay, thank you, put your hands down. Number 3, it says nutrients enter root cells through the process of diffusion. Raise your hand if you agree, and keep your hand down if you disagree. Okay, thank you. Next one, nutrients enter root cells through the process of active transport. Raise your hand if you agree, and keep your hand down if you disagree. Okay, thank you, put your hands down. And then the last one there, plants' roots grow until they find water. If you agree, raise your hand. If you disagree, keep your hand down. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit more about those things at the end. But the main part that I want to talk to you guys today about is diffusion. So if we look at this one up here, we're talking about a high pressure and a low concentration and a high concentration. So we want to be able to move things by that concentration. So a prime example that I always think of when you think of this is like when you get in the bathtub, you know, and your hands get wrinkly. When they get wrinkly, they're absorbing water. So it's moving from a higher concentration to a lower concentration. It's always trying to balance itself out. So hopefully it wants to have the same amount on both sides of the line. So that's what diffusion actually is. The next one we're talking about is active transport. So how is this one different than what we just saw with diffusion? Look at the arrow. What's the arrow doing differently? It's going towards the high pressure, right? Or the high concentration. So it shouldn't actually go that way by what we understand. So it has to actually move it this way by some sort of physical process, which is what active transport actually is. And so that's why it talks about the energy molecule there, the ATP, that helps move it to the actually higher concentration. So when we start looking at this one here, we're talking about roots, and we're talking about absorbing that water that's going to have the nutrients in it. Roots are going to have what is called root hairs. We've talked about that in class. And then we have different transport systems that are going to be located within the plant to be able to allow it to take up water and to be able to actually get that food and then move that food down to the rest of the plant. We look at this little seedling here, we can see that the roots are, you have one primary root, and then we have the root hairs that come off of it. Those root hairs allow for a lot more surface area to be able to absorb more water and nutrients than what was available if we'd had just one single root. So our activity that we have, so at each one of your guys' tables, there's a tray with water in it, with a cup in the middle, and we put food coloring on the outside of that cup. And so what we are going to do is we're going to see how does the water actually enter those root hairs. So if we look at our procedure, it says fill the cup about half full of water, which we did in the middle, and then place the cup of water in the center of the large container. Then fill the large container with water until its level is the same as it is in the cup. And then we added several drops of food coloring to make the water in the large container. We mixed it, and then we made sure we did not put any food coloring in the center cup. So now we're going to be on step number 5, and we're going to use a sharp pencil, and you're going to poke 2 holes in the cup opposite each other. So at this time in your groups, what I want you to do is everybody in your group needs to look around, look at your actual table. Let's go ahead and hold your cup down in the water. Let's poke 2 holes opposite each other in the cup, and let's see how this works.
If you are conducting this experiment at home, please pause the video now. Following the procedure, note what you observe as you witness the process of diffusion. Now that you've completed the experiment, let's think about what happened. Why did the colored water enter the cup? What is the process where a substance moves from an area of higher concentration to an area of lower concentration? Where does the energy come from to drive this process? Let's hear what Sarah Potts has to say. She studies and works with plants as part of her career. Let's learn more.
My name is Melissa Biggie, and I'm the Kansas Regional Representative for Nutrients for Life Foundation. I'm excited to be joined today by Sarah Potts. Sarah is a corn breeder for Corteva Agriscience research station in Adair, Illinois. You might be asking what exactly a corn breeder does. Well, let's talk to Sarah and find out. Thank you for joining us today, Sarah.
Hi, thank you.
As a corn breeder for Corteva, can you give a brief overview of what that entails, starting with what exactly you do as a corn breeder?
So when I'm explaining to people what I do for a living, pretty much I like to say that when you're driving down a country road and you see a bunch of corn out in the field, somebody is responsible for creating those hybrids, and that's essentially my job. As a corn breeding scientist, what I get to do is both work on creating the lines that go into hybrids, as well as trying to figure out what lines to put together to create the right combinations to make a hybrid that goes into a bag to sell to a farmer.
Okay, great. With the science involved in breeding corn, can you tell me what your background is and what education led you to where you are today?
I like to say that it was a bit of an accident how I ended up to be a plant breeding scientist. I actually started out, my bachelor's degree is in horticulture, and I was a landscape designer for a while, but then my husband had suggested, and he thought I would really like going into grad school, and I was looking for a horticulture position, and I got sent to a lab, and they said, well, we don't really do horticulture, we do plant breeding, and we work with germplasm and genetics, and I had no idea what germplasm was, but it sounded really cool, and I remember really liking my introductory plant genetics course at university. So I ended up actually getting an apple breeding master's degree, and then I knew I wanted to stay in the Midwest, so I ended up getting my PhD in corn breeding.
What does a typical day look like for you?
Well, that all depends. In the winter, I sit around a lot in an office and design my program and try and plan my experiments for the next year. But in the spring and summer and fall, I'm out in the field a lot. So I do a lot of data collection. I do a lot of field scouting. I do a lot of data quality control. So I end up being out in the field, taking notes a lot. And then I end up, being on the road some of the time, going out to plant some of our locations, or, just depending on what time of year it is, the activities actually change a lot throughout the year.
What kind of programs are you creating in the winter? How does that look?
So basically in the winter, I'm trying to figure out if I have this many hybrids that I'm creating over the winter, how many of those will actually make it into a trial? I'll be trying to figure out what my next breeding processes are going to be, because developing the lines that go into those hybrids, you have to create breeding populations to in order to make those lines. And so we're doing a lot of figuring out of what populations we want to make, and then basically how to get them through our pipeline into the research product pipeline.
What are some of the challenges you face in a given team? What do you do to overcome those to get the job done?
Data quality, I would say, is a huge challenge, just in the fact of our modeling for genetic predictions has to do with basically taking the genetics and the markers that we've run on our lines and correlating that to the effects that you see in the field. So if you take bad data on what's actually happening in the field to tie to marker traits, then what can happen is your predictions can be off. So data quality is of utmost importance. And having great soil fertility is wonderful, because when you're looking at the differences in yield, the bigger the yield in a field, it turns out that you're able to see differences more easily with higher yields. So soil fertility is really important in our program.
Could you explain a little bit more in depth what those markers are?
Absolutely. So basically, each plant has its own set of DNA. And what we can do is we do something called genotyping, which is we take markers to determine what certain base pairs are in the genetics of the line. And you can take those markers and correlate them with the field phenotype that you're seeing. So plant height or yield or whatever you're looking at. So the markers are basically telling us a little bit about the genetics and can help us predict what the actual phenotype of the plant is going to be.
What's your favorite part of your job?
It's probably a tie between being outside, which I really like working outside a lot, and the fact that my job changes from day to day. I'm one of those people that likes to do a lot of new things. And so as soon as I find myself getting bored with something, oh, it's time to move on to the next step. Oh, you've been taking tassel notes too many days in a row. Well, that's great, because it's time to look at stay green, or whatever traits in the pipeline next. And there's always something different to do. And the job seems like it's changing and it's fresh every day.
Is there something unique that makes your job special, or is there a fun fact about your job?
What I really like about my job is being able to work on and develop products that you actually get to see in a field as you're driving by. Now the product pipeline is about 5 to 7 years. So I've been working here for 6 years, so I don't have anything that's in a bag yet you can see in a field, but I am very much looking forward to the day I can drive through a field and see a line that I developed.
How does your career connect to agriculture or the fertilizer industry?
So obviously we are an agriculture only company. And so with that, obviously farmers are our customers, and agronomy is very important to what we do. As far as how it pertains to the fertilizer industry, really yield is one of the biggest things we look at. Obviously a farmer doesn't want to buy our corn if it's not going to yield anything. And so one of the things we can do to help tell differences better in our fields is in our research fields, where we're trying to figure out what is going to make the best products. If we can increase our yield as much as possible, you're able to see the differences in varieties better. So having good soil fertility and good organic matter is really important to what we do, because if we have low yielding fields, sometimes it's a good thing to make sure your lines will tolerate stress well. But for the majority of our trials, we really want to maximize yield. And so soil fertility is really important.
What would your recommendation to anyone who hears you today and says, that's exactly what I want to do? Is there any advice that you would give them?
My best advice would be find out about grad school, because I did not know this, but when I started looking into grad school, I found that you can actually get paid to go to school, which is fantastic. Now, bachelor's degree, typically either you get a scholarship or you have to pay to go to school. But for most people, at least in agriculture, there are either research assistantships where you get to work in a lab, or there are teaching assistantships where you can teach a class, or there are fellowships. And usually that would include a tuition waiver as well as a stipend. So it's like going to school, but as a job. So that was like my best little secret about grad school that I learned when I went into grad school.
Is there anything else you'd like to share?
Yeah, I mean, so plant breeding, like I said, I got into it completely by accident, but it was a very happy accident. I had been in landscape design, and it wasn't where my heart was. And so when I found plant breeding and this existed as a career, I just fell in love with it. And so my advice to all you high school students is find something that you will really enjoy, and you might not find it right away, and that's okay.
Well, thank you so much today for joining us, Sarah. It was great to hear from you, and we hope that this inspired students to maybe look at corn breeding for a career. So thank you, Sarah, for joining us. It was great to have you.
Thank you very much for having me.